supposed to be the best viewing spot Havana has to offer.
Here's a little windblown from our convertible, which matches my dress.
Look at this beauty. You ready for the beach?
Ready for the sun.
Where are we right now?
Verdadero Beach. Verdadero.
There's no two V's, it's only one.
Verdadero?
Yeah.
Oh, Verdadero. obviously we're back from Cuba. It's been a few weeks, and we wanted to create a little video to kind of talk about some tips and tricks on kind of how to travel there, because a lot of people have kind of asked us, saying it's on their bucket list, they want to go, and they just weren't sure on how to do it. So Dhruv's going to start off with talking about kind of how to book your ticket and how to make sure you get the visa to travel into Cuba.
So booking a trip to Cuba, it's not complicated as people make it sound. You just go online to the airline website. So only 3 major carriers from the U.S. go to Cuba: Southwest, Delta, and JetBlue. When you go on the website, you're gonna book your flight like any other flight you would book, but then it's gonna ask you, why are you going to Cuba? And then you have to choose from one of the 9 options. The easiest one is people to people or support the Cuban people option. That's the easiest one. You're gonna pick that, and then once you pass that page, you're gonna either pay your visa fee online or you're gonna pay it at the airport at the departing gate when you're going to Cuba. And that's also where you will get your visa. And the visa is like a piece of paper which you have to hold on to. And now the key thing is, once you get to Cuba, you want to make sure that the immigration's officer in Cuba does not stamp your U.S. passport. If they do, it's not a big deal. It's really faint from what we've seen, but if you want to try to avoid it as much as possible, because you might run into trouble when you come back to the U.S. We have heard some stories that people have been like banned from like global entry and whatnot because they got caught. We didn't have any issues when we came back to the U.S. We had global entry. It was literally a 30-second thing, and we were out of the customs and immigration area.
Yeah, so I would say once you booked your ticket, kind of the next steps is kind of pre-planning what you want to do in Cuba and things you can kind of just be aware of before you get there. So I think the biggest thing for both of us was making sure that we had enough currency for when we got there, because though they do have ATMs and they do accept credit cards, they don't let U.S. citizens utilize U.S. bank debit cards or credit cards. So if you have, a bank account in Canada or a bank account in Eastern Europe or anywhere else, you can probably use that. But if you don't, you have to kind of be prepared to take enough money for the whole duration of your trip. I think for us, we probably spent on average about $100 or so a day. So we were there for about 4 days. So we took about, I think, a little less than $500. So luckily we had enough, but we definitely have heard stories of people kind of running out of cash and then kind of having to figure it out. So then I think the other thing that you can kind of prep for is also booking your stay. So kind of similar to not being able to utilize credit cards and US debit cards, you can't also stay at hotels in Cuba. So you're kind of limited to staying at an Airbnb. And so we found one that was, I would say, pretty reasonable. I think it was like $75 a night, right?
Which Airbnbs are super cheap there. We got
really nice one.
We got a high-end Airbnb. You can get one for $25 a night there. So it really depends. The range is broader, but Airbnb is your only way, and you want to pre-plan and make sure you have all that set up before heading to Cuba.
Yep. And then I think Dhruv was also going to talk about kind of making sure you have an itinerary in place, kind of covering what areas you want to see, what you want to do. We did an old convertible tour, and then we also did a day trip to Veradero. So Dhruv's going to touch on kind of how we did that and all the logistics.
Yeah, I mean, when you make an itinerary, usually you can, you have to book everything in advance from over here. That's going to be the easiest way, because a few things you want to remember. Once you get there, you don't have cell phone signal. If you want internet, you will have to get a SIM card there, and it's like paying per megabyte, and it's not expensive per se, but it's like a Wi-Fi zone, so you have to be in current areas where they have internet, internet's not something that's common over there. No one has it really. So it's kind of like you're going to be detached to the outside of the world once you're in Cuba. So that's one of the things. So you have to be prepared to download offline maps. There's called maps.me, which I'll link. That basically it's like Google offline maps, but that one is like more for international travel, and it has like restaurant names and landmarks and stuff. So it's kind of nicer than Google Maps, but you want to have an offline map so you know when you're going somewhere. But making that itinerary and then going off of it, there's so many things you can do in Cuba. So you want to research, and there's different areas. You basically want to know every day what you're gonna do, at least for like a block of period, like have that down. So then, and you'll also need it if you were to be asked by an immigration officer why you went there. If you went for people to people or support the Cuban people, you gotta have a reason why. So you have to show them itinerary on that, and that's probably one of the key things you want to do before going to Cuba.
Yeah, and I think it's also helpful because then you know kind of how to allocate your days. And there are a lot of different agencies. We'll link the one below, the one we used, that basically you can tell them what you want to do, the amount of time you're going for, and they can put together an itinerary for you. So it can kind of be customized to why you're going and incorporate, people to people, or if you're there for journalism, or if you're there for just any other purpose, you can incorporate that into your itinerary. And then that's something a little bit more, I would say, not necessarily legal, but a little bit more standard, that if you do get questioned, you feel a little bit more confident and comfortable in kind of giving an explanation. So I think we've kind of touched on all of the stuff that we did to kind of prep for our trip to Cuba. A few things that we realized and learned once we got there that we thought would be helpful is once we landed, we obviously didn't have any cash in the Cuban currency. There's two types of currency. There's the Cuban pesos.
It's a CUP and CUC. So the key thing is you want to know the difference between the two. You want to know what they look like, because you can easily get ripped off. Because one CUP is $1 to 25 CUP, and then CUC is basically 1-to-1. So we've heard about people getting like ripped off because they thought they had the right current. They thought they were getting CUCs, but they actually got CUPs. So they basically got ripped off on their conversion rate.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the CUP has faces on it, and the CUC has, I believe it's what is it called? Like towers or buildings or monuments, landmarks. That's what I was trying to figure out. But there's a clear distinction. So do a little bit of research, check that out so you know what it looks like. So when you do get your currency exchange, if you're not going to the currency exchange right outside of the airport, that you're not getting ripped off. Even like later on during your trip, if you're converting more US dollars to the Cuban pesos or Cuban currency. And also, I was going to mention, just as a quick note, because I think a lot of blogs that we saw ahead of time that we read, people didn't know where the currency exchange was at the airport. So I think we landed in Terminal 2, and it was right outside the exit doors on your right. So you'll see it. Most people, if you ask them, if you don't speak that much Spanish, it's easier to kind of just know where to look. It's outside of the exit doors rather than inside of the airport.
You would think it's inside because any other airport in the world has it inside, but they have it outside. Yeah. But you can also, in the plaza area, all the nicer hotels of Cuba, even though we can't stay there.
You can
visit, but if you're from the U.S., if you can't stay there, but if you go to the lobby, they usually have a foreign exchange. So you can always convert at all those places. Worst case scenario, if you don't want to convert everything right off the back.
Yeah. So I think that's a good background on taking all the money you need and then how to kind of convert it and what to keep in mind. I think the other big thing for us was also we really enjoy, I would say, walking everywhere. So we didn't end up taking a cab too often, but in terms of transportation, you can generally get to a lot of the major landmarks and places you want to see in Havana by foot. But the cabs are a completely easy option. You're able to negotiate with them, and they're really safe. We never felt unsafe overall in our whole trip. So just make sure that you do identify like how much you want to pay to get from point A to B. Obviously, that's where referencing the offline maps helps because you know distance-wise. But definitely make use of cabs if you are tired or don't want to walk somewhere because they're really easy to find one and get to point A to point B.
You can take a bus too, which is like a cent.
Literally, like it's so cheap. But yeah, so that's kind of how to get from place to place. We kind of, I would say, like in Cuba, we didn't really make reservations for any specific restaurants. All of the places we went to were actually really, really good. I don't think we had any bad meals.
We didn't make, our Airbnb host did make a reservation for us, but usually your host, most of the hosts, the Airbnbs are super helpful because they want the tourism. That's what they're striving on, and so people will be helpful if you do need reservations once you get there.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that we were gonna talk about was the offline maps, but I think we've already covered that. So I think in terms of helpful tips for when you're there, I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, we felt safe the whole time. Our Airbnb that we stayed at was super helpful. They thrive on tourism. So I think as long as you're open to trying new things, trying new adventures, you're not going to really run into any issues. So look out for our blog. We're going to be putting one up on our website, so it'll have some helpful things, helpful tips, as well as some of the cool experiences we did and what we thought of them.
Hope you decide to go to Cuba because it's only literally 90 miles from Miami, and it's such a short trip, quick trip. I think everyone should go to Cuba and take advantage of it while you can. I know you can go through Caribbean cruise or whatnot, but I think flying in there is probably where you're going to get the most out of Cuba. And it's such a beautiful country really makes you humble on what we have back home.
Yeah, you guys will love it. Till next time.